"This is the smallest I've seen." The giant Apache gasped. The rancher hesitated. "And did something. This is the smallest I've seen." Dakota Winterhawk's voice shattered like glass. This giant Apache warrior woman, 6 feet 2 inches of scarred muscle and survival instinct, standing in the merciless Texas sun, with tears streaming down her copper face, pointing at the dying infant between them, with a hand that had killed 4 men, but now trembled with helpless desperation. The baby, barely 4 pounds, blue-lipped, gasping, had maybe an hour left to live. Colton Reed, the rancher who'd sworn never to care again after the woman he loved called him too small, too safe, too nothing, stood frozen. His eyes were locked on the dirt, his fists clenched white, his entire body radiating the cowardice of a man about to abandon the only 2 souls who'd ever truly needed him. "Look at her." Dakota's voice cracked with raw anguish. "This is the smallest, most innocent life, and you—" Her massive shoulders heaved with a sob she couldn't control. "After what we shared last night, after you held me like I mattered, you're just going to let her die. Let me go." But Colton hesitated. The truth was carved into his bones. Choosing them meant death. The bounty hunters tracking Dakota would gut him without mercy. Choosing them meant scandal. A white rancher harboring a wanted Apache woman and her newborn daughter. Choosing them meant ripping open the heart he'd spent 5 years building walls around, brick by careful brick. Because that baby wasn't just some abandoned child. She was Dakota's own daughter, premature, born screaming in Colton's barn just 18 hours ago, while Dakota bled and begged God for mercy. Colton had delivered that impossible tiny girl with his own shaking hands, had cut the cord with his ranch knife, had wrapped her in his cleanest blanket, while Dakota wept with relief and terror. Her name was Hope, and now Hope was dying. "Say something," Dakota whispered, and for the first time since riding onto his property, this warrior woman who'd killed her abusive husband with her bare hands looked small, breakable. "Colton, please, anything." What could he say? That he was terrified. That the thought of instant fatherhood made his throat close. That every time he looked at that struggling baby, he saw his own failure 5 years ago, when Maria had laughed in his face and called him too boring, too safe, too small to ever matter to anyone. "I don't know how to do this," Colton finally managed, his voice barely carrying over the wind. "Neither do I." Dakota's hands flew up in desperate fury, and the movement made her stagger. She was still bleeding from the birth, still weak, but rage gave her strength. "You think I planned this? Giving birth in a stranger's barn? Watching my daughter's first breath sound like her last." She took a step toward him, magnificent even in her pain. "But she's here, she's alive, and she needs us to be brave for one more day." "One day," Colton repeated, tasting the words like poison. "And then what? Your husband's brothers are hunting you. There's a $1,000 bounty on your head. They'll come here, Dakota. And when they do, then we fight. I can't. You can." Dakota's hand shot out and grabbed his shirt, pulling him so close he could see gold flecks in her dark eyes. "Last night, when I was dying on your barn floor, when the baby wouldn't come and blood was everywhere, you didn't hesitate. You saved us both. Where is that man now?" Colton's eyes finally lifted from the dirt to meet hers. They burned with something he couldn't name, rage and hope and heartbreak tangled together like barbed wire. "That man didn't have time to think," Colton said quietly. "Then stop thinking." Dakota's voice dropped to something raw and pleading. "Stop counting the cost and just look at her. Look at Hope." The baby made a sound then, a weak, mewling cry that barely rose above the wind. It was the sound of something surrendering. Dakota's face crumpled. She released Colton's shirt and nearly fell. He caught her elbow, felt how she trembled. This giant woman shaking like a cottonwood leaf. "I'm losing her," Dakota breathed. "Just like I lost my first daughter. I know what dying sounds like, Colton. And that's what I'm hearing right now." Something cracked inside Colton's chest. Maybe it was the way Dakota said "my first daughter," acknowledging the 3-year-old who died of fever 2 years ago, the grief she carried every single day. Maybe it was Hope's weakening cry. Maybe it was the memory of last night. When Dakota had gripped his hand during a brutal contraction and whispered, "Don't let me die alone," he hadn't let her die alone then, and he wouldn't let Hope die now. "What does she need?" Colton heard himself ask. Dakota's head snapped up. Hope flared in her eyes, desperate, dangerous hope. "What?" "The baby. To survive. What does she need?" "A doctor." Dakota's words tumbled out fast, frantic. "Medicine, warmth, feeding every 2 hours because she's too weak. Someone to watch her breathing through the night." "Fort Stockton has a doctor," Colton interrupted. 3 hours ride. I can't go there. The moment someone recognizes me, you won't be recognized." Colton's mind was racing now, plans forming faster than fear could stop them. "We'll say you're my wife. We'll say the baby came early. They'll see I'm Apache. They'll see you're my wife," Colton said firmly, surprised by the steel in his own voice. "And anyone who has a problem with that can answer to my Winchester." Dakota just stared at him. A tear rolled down her cheek, catching sunlight. "You'd do that? Claim us both?" "Yeah." Colton reached down and gently picked up Hope, cradling her against his chest. She was impossibly light, impossibly fragile. Her eyes fluttered open for just a second, dark eyes like her mother's, like they were asking him a question. "I would." Dakota's hand covered her mouth. A sound escaped, half laugh, half sob. "Why?" she whispered. Colton looked at Hope, then back at Dakota. "Because 5 years ago, Maria was right. I was small. I was safe. I hid from everything that mattered." He pressed a kiss to Hope's tiny forehead. "But this little girl doesn't care about my past. She just needs someone to fight for her. And maybe that's enough." Dakota closed the distance in 2 steps and cupped his face with her calloused palm. "You've always been enough," she said fiercely. "You just needed something worth being brave for." Hope whimpered, and Dakota immediately shifted. "We need to move. Now, every minute." "I know." Colton handed the baby to Dakota, who tucked her inside her dress for warmth. "Can you ride?" "I'll crawl to Fort Stockton if I have to." "You won't." Colton started for the barn, then stopped. "Dakota? What's her full name?" Dakota smiled through her tears. "Hope, just Hope. I was waiting for you to give her the rest." "Hope Winterhawk Reed," Colton said without hesitation. "She gets both of us, and for the first time since riding onto his ranch with death chasing her." Dakota laughed, real and full of relief, and the smallest sliver of belief that maybe they'd all survive this. Colton ran for the horses, his heart clear for the first time in 5 years. He was about to throw away everything safe, and it felt like finally waking up. The horses were dying beneath them, and they were only halfway there. Colton could feel his mount's sides heaving like bellows, could hear the ragged gasps that said the animal was running on nothing but will. Beside him, Dakota clung to her saddle with her thighs, one arm wrapped around baby Hope pressed against her chest, the other hand white-knuckled on the reins. Blood had soaked through the back of her dress, dark and spreading. She was still hemorrhaging from yesterday's birth, still losing herself drop by drop across the Texas desert. "How is she?" Colton shouted over the thunder of hooves. Dakota glanced down at the bundle against her heart. Her face went pale. She stopped crying. Those 3 words hit Colton like a fist to the gut. He'd been counting on those weak little cries to tell him Hope was still fighting. Silence meant surrender. Silence meant they were losing. "We're close," Colton lied, because they weren't close at all. "Another hour at least, maybe more. Just hold on." "Colton." Dakota's voice was fading, getting dreamy and distant. "I can't feel my legs anymore." He looked over and saw it, the way she was tilting in the saddle, the way her eyes were losing focus. Blood loss, shock. Her body was shutting down, giving up, letting go. No. Colton grabbed his reins with his teeth and reached across the gap between horses, catching Dakota's arm. "You stay with me. You hear me? Don't you dare quit now." "Not quitting." Her smile was faint and sad. "Just so tired. Then sleep when we get there. Not before." He squeezed her arm hard enough to hurt, trying to shock her back to alertness. "Think about Hope. Think about holding her when she's healthy. Think about her first word, her first step. You don't get to miss that, Dakota. You don't get to leave her. Something flickered in Dakota's eyes, a spark of the warrior woman who'd ridden onto his ranch yesterday with death at her heels. "You're right." She straightened in the saddle, gritting her teeth against the pain. "I don't get to leave her. Not again." They rode harder, pushing the horses past exhaustion into something brutal and necessary. The August sun hammered down without mercy. Sweat stung Colton's eyes. His shirt was plastered to his back. But worse than the heat, worse than the exhaustion screaming in every muscle, was the sound Dakota kept making, a low, continuous prayer in Apache that sounded like she was already saying goodbye. "Stop that," Colton said sharply. "Stop what?" "Mourning her. She's not dead yet." Dakota's jaw tightened. "I lost my first daughter to fever. Held her while she burned up from the inside, while she stopped recognizing me, while she—" Her voice cracked. "I know what losing a child feels like, Colton. And I feel it happening again. This isn't the same. You're not alone this time. You've got me. You've got medicine waiting. You've got—" A gunshot cracked across the desert. Both horses reared. Colton fought to control his mount, his heart hammering. Dakota nearly dropped hope, but caught herself at the last second, wrapping both arms around the baby protectively. "Riders!" Dakota pointed back with her chin. 3 of them. Maybe 4. Colton twisted in his saddle and his blood went to ice. 4 men on horseback, half a mile back and closing fast. Even at this distance, he could see the glint of rifles catching sunlight. Could see the determined way they sat their horses. "Your husband's brothers?" Colton asked, though he already knew. Dakota's face had gone hard as stone. "The one in front, that's Marcus. Eldest brother. He's the one who swore he'd skin me alive for killing his baby brother." She looked at Colton, and her eyes held something he'd never seen there before. Fear. Pure animal fear. "We can't outrun them. Not with the horses this tired. Not with me bleeding. Not with another shot. Closer this time." A warning hope made a sound so weak it was barely human. A whistle, a gasp, a dying. "Fort Stockton is still 40 minutes away," Dakota said flatly. "They'll catch us in 5. Colton's mind raced through options and found nothing. She was right. The horses were finished. Dakota could barely stay conscious. Hope was fading, and 4 killers were closing in with fresh mounts and murder in their hearts. Every smart part of his brain screamed the same thing. This was hopeless. This was suicide. This was exactly why smart men stayed uninvolved. But Colton was done being smart. There. He pointed northeast to where red rocks jutted from the desert floor. "Old Prospector's Canyon. Narrow entrance, high walls. We can defend it." Dakota understood immediately. "You want to make a stand. I want you to keep riding while I hold them off." "No, Dakota, I said no." Her shout startled the horses. Hope's weak crying intensified. "I've lost everyone, Colton. My sister, my first daughter, every piece of family I ever had. I'm not losing you, too. I'm not riding away wondering if you screamed when they killed you." Her words hung in the scorching air between them. "Then we stand together," Colton said quietly. "Hide Hope somewhere safe. Then we fight. 3 experienced killers against a rancher and a woman who can barely stand. You've killed 4 men. I've got a Winchester and 5 years of rage." Colton managed a grim smile. "I like our odds," Dakota laughed despite everything. "You're insane. I'm committed." He spurred his dying horse toward the rocks. "There's a difference." They made it to the canyon with maybe 3 minutes to spare. The entrance was exactly as Colton remembered, narrow enough for single file, opening into a sheltered bowl with high walls. A tiny spring trickled through the center. Colton dismounted before his horse fully stopped. "Get Hope hidden. Back there, behind those rocks. Keep her warm. Keep her quiet." Dakota slid from her saddle and nearly collapsed. Colton caught her, and for a moment they just stood there, her leaning against him, Hope between them, both of them shaking with exhaustion and terror, and something that felt dangerously close to love. "I need to say something," Dakota whispered. "In case, don't. Let me finish." She pulled back enough to look at his face. "Last night, when I thought I was dying, you held my hand and said, 'I've got you.' Nobody's ever said that to me and meant it. Not my husband, not my tribe, not anyone." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Just you." Colton cupped her face with both hands. "I've got you," he said again, "and I'm not letting go. He kissed her, fierce and quick and full of everything he couldn't say. When they broke apart, Dakota was smiling through her tears. "Stay alive! Colton Reed! Stay hidden, Dakota Winterhawk." She disappeared into the rocks with hope. Colton grabbed his Winchester and took position at the canyon entrance. His heart hammering so hard he thought his ribs might crack. The sound of hoofbeats echoed off stone walls. 5 years ago, Maria had called him too small to matter. That man was gone. The man crouching in this canyon with a rifle and desperate prayer was different. He had something worth dying for. A woman who saw him whole. A baby who needed him brave. The first rider appeared at the entrance. Marcus Winterhawk was massive, 6.5 feet of muscle and cold eyes and violence barely contained. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. "I know you're in there, Reed." His voice was deep as a grave. "Saw your tracks. Saw the blood trail from where that Apache whore is bleeding out." He smiled. "Here's how this works. Give me Dakota and the half-breed baby. I kill you quick. Make me come in there, I take my time." Colton didn't answer. "Just kept his rifle trained on Marcus's chest, no?" Marcus's smile widened. "Then let's begin." The canyon exploded into gunfire and chaos, and the smallest choice becoming everything. The gunfight lasted 7 minutes, but felt like 7 hours. Colton fired, reloaded, fired again, every shot deliberate, every bullet precious. He'd hit Marcus once in the shoulder, saw the big man stumble and curse but keep coming. The other 3 had scattered, taking cover behind rocks, trying to flank him. Bullets chipped stone inches from Colton's head. The air smelled like gunpowder and fear and sun-baked desert. Then he heard it, the sound that made his blood stop cold. Hope. Crying. Not the weak whistle from before, but a full-throated wail that echoed off the canyon walls like a beacon, like a signal flare telling every killer exactly where Dakota was hiding. "There!" Marcus shouted, and all 4 men turned toward the rocks at the back of the canyon. Colton didn't think. He just moved, stepped out from cover, and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. Pop, 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 dropping 1 man instantly, winging another, forcing the rest to dive for cover. Then he was running, sprinting toward the rocks where Dakota had hidden. His boots sliding on loose gravel, his lungs burning. He found Dakota slumped against the stone. Hope clutched to her chest, blood spreading from a fresh wound in her side. A ricochet or a bullet that had found her through sheer bad luck. Her eyes were unfocused, her breathing shallow. But she was still protecting the baby with both arms, even as she bled out. "No, no, no." Colton dropped beside her, pressing his hand against the wound. Hot blood pulsed between his fingers. "Dakota, stay with me. Take her." Dakota's voice was barely a whisper. She held Hope up with trembling arms. "Take our daughter and run. There's still time. You can make it to the fort if you—" "I'm not leaving you. Colton, I said no." He grabbed Hope with one hand, keeping pressure on Dakota's wound with the other. The baby was crying harder now, her face red, her tiny fists clenched. But she was alive. She was fighting. "We're all leaving together or none of us are." That was the deal. Footsteps crunched on gravel behind them. Colton spun, raising his revolver, but Marcus was already there, rifle aimed at Colton's chest, close enough that missing was impossible. The other 2 men flanked him, weapons ready, faces hard, with the kind of hate that didn't need words. "Touching," Marcus said. "Really? The white hero trying to save the savage and her bastard." He cocked his rifle. "But this story ends the way it always was going to end. With my brother's murderer, and everyone stupid enough to help her bleeding out in this canyon." Colton shifted, putting himself between Marcus and Dakota, still clutching Hope against his chest. "You want them, you go through me," Marcus laughed. "Son, that was always the plan." The rifle swung toward Colton's head, and a bugle sounded in the distance. Everyone froze. The sound came again, closer now, unmistakable. Military bugle, cavalry call. Marcus's face went from triumph to confusion to fury in 3 seconds. "Boss," one of his men said nervously. "That's army. I know what it is." Marcus snarled, but he was already backing up, already calculating odds. already realizing that killing a white rancher in front of U.S. cavalry would turn this from bounty hunting into something that ended with ropes and graves. Hoofbeats now. Lots of them, coming fast. A patrol, maybe a dozen soldiers, appearing at the canyon entrance with rifles raised and an officer shouting orders. They must have heard the gunfire, must have come to investigate. Marcus looked at Colton with pure hatred. "This isn't over." "Yeah," Colton said, his voice steady despite everything. "It is." Marcus spat in the dirt, then whistled sharply. His men followed him toward their horses, mounting up, disappearing into the desert like smoke. The soldiers let them go. No clear crime witnessed, no jurisdiction over Apache tribal disputes, just grateful they'd prevented a massacre. The lieutenant who'd led the patrol dismounted and hurried over. "Sir, are you good God she's been shot?" "Medic now!" Everything after that happened in a blur. Soldiers lifting Dakota gently, wrapping her wound with clean bandages. Colton still holding hope, following them out of the canyon. Watching the fort appear on the horizon like salvation made of wood and stone, and American flags snapping in the wind. The doctor met them at the infirmary. Same gray-haired man with steady hands and kind eyes who'd probably seen everything the frontier could throw at him. He took one look at Dakota and started barking orders. Took hope from Colton's arms with surprising gentleness. "The baby first," Dakota gasped from the examination table. "Save her first." "Ma'am, you're the one who—" "I don't care." Dakota tried to sit up and nearly passed out. "My daughter, please, she's premature. She can't breathe right. She needs—" "I've got her!" The doctor was already checking Hope's color, her breathing, her tiny heartbeat. His face was grave but not hopeless. "She's severely premature, maybe 2 months early, but she's a fighter. I can work with that." He glanced at his assistant. "Warm bath, goat's milk, and prepare the feeding tube. This little one needs calories and warmth in that order." Then he turned to Dakota, and his expression gentled. "And you, young lady, need stitches and blood and rest. Your husband can stay with you, but you need to let me work. He's not—" Dakota started, then stopped. Looked at Colton standing there, covered in blood and dust and gunpowder, still holding his rifle like he'd fight the whole world for her. "Yes, my husband. He stays. The doctor worked for 3 hours. Stitched Dakota's wounds. The gunshot, the birth trauma, everything that had been slowly killing her. Fed Hope through a tiny tube, drop by precious drop, while the baby fought and struggled and gradually, impossibly started to pink up. Started to breathe easier. Started to look less like a dying thing and more like a human being, with a chance." Colton sat beside Dakota's bed, holding her hand, watching her sleep. She'd passed out the moment the doctor started stitching, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion now that Hope was safe. Every so often she'd mumble something in Apache, squeeze his hand, then drift deeper. "Your wife's remarkable," the doctor said quietly, checking Dakota's bandages. "Most women would have died from blood loss alone. The fact that she rode that far, survived a gunfight, and still had the strength to demand I help her baby first." He shook his head in wonder. "She's got a warrior's heart." "Yeah," Colton said softly. "She does. The baby, too." "Hope, you said?" The doctor glanced at the tiny bundle sleeping in a heated basket nearby. "She shouldn't be alive. Everything says she shouldn't be alive. But she keeps fighting anyway, just like her mother." Colton stood and walked to Hope's basket, looking down at the impossibly small person who'd changed everything in less than 2 days. Her chest rose and fell steadily now. Her lips were pink. Her miniature fingers curled and uncurled, like she was reaching for something. "Hey, little warrior," Colton whispered. "You did it. You made it." Hope's eyes opened, dark and aware, and locked on his face like she knew him, like she'd known him all along. Colton reached down and let her wrap one tiny hand around his finger. The grip was weak but present, and something in his chest cracked wide open, not breaking but expanding, making room for something bigger than fear, bigger than his small, careful life. "I'm your father now," he told her. "Maybe not by blood, but by choice. And I choose you, every day, for the rest of my life. You and your mother both." Behind him, Dakota made a sound, half laugh, half sob. He turned and found her awake, tears streaming down her face, smiling at him with something that looked dangerously close to love. "You mean that?" she whispered, every word. Dakota held out her hand, and Colton took it, lacing their fingers together. "Then we're a family, the three of us, against the whole world if we have to be." "Against the whole world," Colton agreed. 3 weeks later, they left Fort Stockton. Dakota healed enough to ride, Hope strong enough to travel, both of them carrying documents that said Dakota Reed and Hope Winterhawk Reed were legally under Colton's protection as his wife and daughter. The fort commander had asked surprisingly few questions, just signed the papers and wished them luck. They rode back to Colton's ranch under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Dakota sat tall in her saddle again, Hope sleeping peacefully in a sling against her chest. And Colton rode beside them, this impossible family he'd somehow been brave enough to choose. "What now?" Dakota asked as the ranch appeared on the horizon. Colton thought about it, really thought about what came next. The gossip, the stares, the people who'd call him traitor, call Dakota savage, call Hope something worse. The fights they'd face, the hatred they'd endure, the simple act of existing together being a rebellion against everything 1884 Texas believed. "Now we live," Colton said simply. "We raise our daughter. We build something good. And anyone who has a problem with that can answer to both of us." Dakota smiled, fierce and beautiful and free. "I can live with that." That night, they put Hope down in the crib Colton had built from scrap wood, watching her sleep like she was the most precious thing in the world. Because she was everything. The smallest life that had made them both finally, impossibly, magnificently big enough to matter. "Thank you," Dakota whispered, leaning against Colton in the doorway. "For what?" "For being brave when I needed you to be. For choosing us when it would have been easier to walk away. For proving that the smallest courage, one man saying yes when the world says no, can change everything." Colton wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, feeling her solid and real and alive beside him. "You're the one who rode onto my ranch and woke me up." I was already dead. I just didn't know it yet. They stood there in the darkness, watching their daughter breathe, listening to the desert wind, holding each other like they'd never let go. And Colton Reed, who'd been called too small his entire life, finally understood the truth. Love doesn't make you bigger. It just makes you brave enough to be exactly who you always were. Enough. The end.